By attempting to break through the defenses of the Kharkiv region, Russia in fact did a disservice to itself. The Federation's troops have failed to achieve success on the battlefield, and Ukraine's Western partners, one after another, are giving Kyiv permission to use their weapons to hit targets on Russian territory.
In accordance with international law, Ukraine has every right to do what it does. This needs to be said directly. Ukraine was attacked and can defend itself. I find it strange that some people say it shouldn't be allowed to defend itself.
Until recently, one of the main intrigues was whether Washington would allow attacks on Russia with American weapons. The United States, the leader in arms supplies to Ukraine, allowed the Ukrainian armed forces to use HIMARS launchers, GMLRS-guided munitions and artillery for attacks on the territory of Russia. The caveat is that strikes must be targeted against concentrations of enemy troops or military installations that attack or pose a threat not only to the Kharkiv region but also to the other border areas, explained Michael Carpenter, Senior Director for European Affairs at the U.S. National Security Council. The decision was greatly facilitated by Antony Blinken's visit to Kyiv, the New York Times is confident.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken had come back from a sovereign trip to Kyiv and privately told the president that his 27-month-long ban against shooting American weapons into Russian territory was now placing parts of Ukraine in peril. The Russians, he said, were exploiting the president's ban and mounting constant attacks from a safe haven just inside the Russian border. But by that time, Jake Sullivan, the president's national security advisor, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had already concluded that the geography of the battle around Kharkiv would require an exception to the hard rule that the United States had set against firing into Russia, senior officials said. Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Austin concluded that it made no sense to restrict the Ukrainians from responding, from a publication by the New York Times.
France is not only allowed to use its weapons on Russian territory. According to the newspaper Le Monde, Emmanuel Macron plans to assemble a coalition of allies ready to send military instructors to train soldiers in Ukraine.
How can we explain to the Ukrainians that we plan to defend these cities, for example, around Kharkiv, if we tell them that it is not allowed to reach the points from which missiles are fired? We tell them, we supply you with weapons, but you cannot defend yourself. We must allow them to neutralize the military installations from which the missiles are launched, and mainly the military installations from which Ukraine is being attacked.
Not all countries have put forward specific conditions regarding the issue of strikes of their weapons deep into Russia. The BBC publication, citing its own anonymous sources, suggests that in some cases we may be talking about long-range weapons.
The UK and France, which provide Ukraine with jointly made Shadow Storm air-launched cruise missiles, or SCALP as they are called in France, haven't explicitly restricted their use, and their range can go up to 250 kilometers. In fact, French President Emmanuel Macron told journalists last week, we should allow Ukraine to neutralize the military sites from which the missiles are fired, and basically the military sites from which Ukraine is attacked. And such rhetoric is seen as permission to use Storm Shadow and SCALPs. A military aviation officer who prefers to remain anonymous told the BBC. So he says Ukraine can now hit airfields in the Kursk and Belgorod regions that border Ukraine, from a publication by BBC.
At the same time, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy is confident that there should be more permits for the usage of long-range weapons deep inside Russia. After all, Federation troops continue to use long-range artillery and weapon system with tens of thousands of missiles to attack peaceful cities in Ukraine. Reported by Diana Kolesnik, Larisa Zubenko, UATV News.